Welcome, everyone, to the Against the Stream podcast. This week with a special guest, Alan Woods, a Marxist theoretician and author, and a member of the Revolutionary Communist International. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Today we have a very interesting program dedicated to Donald Trump. He was approved by Congress on the 7th of January, this time without much chaos and other things happening. And we want to focus on what this means for America and for the world, and also what it means for the internal conflict in the ruling class in the US. Now, on the day that he was approved by the US Congress, which I think legally makes him the president now, I'm not sure, but he went on record from his estate in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, making a series of statements which have sent shockwaves through world politics. Amongst those were that Greenland must belong to America, the Panama Canal must belong to America, and even Canada must be a part of America. And when it comes to Greenland and the Panama Canal, he even refused to rule out the use of force, military force, to annex those areas, essentially. Now, this has obviously been a big shift. It seems to, although he said many of these things before, but it seems like this time it's a lot more serious, and it's been taken serious by commentators around the world. What do you think this represents as a shift in U.S. foreign policy?
Well, that's an interesting question. I hope I've got an interesting answer, or at least an opinion. I mean, you can all have opinions about what Donald Trump says. He says many things, and very often what he says seems to be quite, well, not to waste words on it, it seems to be quite absurd, quite nonsensical, and many people have taken it like that. Oh, perhaps maybe he's just joking, or maybe he's just making a point, attacking certain people, insulting certain people in certain nations, which he's a specialist at doing. Yeah, but you see, I think that's, in a way, in my opinion, that's underestimating Donald Trump as a politician. Because if you examine his statements carefully, some of them, of course, are nonsensical, I'll grant you that, but not all of them. And this one in particular, it caught my... I was interested in, and many other people also were quite interested and quite shocked by it. And these statements are quite shocking if you take them literally. But what's the meaning behind it? You see, I believe that very often with Trump, because he has an agenda. Oh yes, he's got it, and it's quite coherent. It's not no secret. It's not an incoherent thing. It's quite a coherent agenda if you care to analyze it. And in the words of Shakespeare, though in Hamlet, though this be madness, yet there's method in it. By the way, you forgot to mention Mexico. You also had a few interesting things to say about Mexico. Now, the choice of countries is interesting, by the way. Canada, which is next door to the United States, and Iceland, which is arguably part of the same
Greenland.
continent. Did I say Iceland? Greenland, I beg your pardon. It's arguably
lots of ice there, but still Greenland.
It's Greenland, you're quite right. Which is a country with a small population, owned by Denmark, by the way, controlled by Danish imperialism, I'll put it that way.
Oh yeah, this is a colony.
It is a colony, indeed it is. With a lot of interesting natural resources, which of course the American imperialists would be interested in possessing. So there's logic in that. And Mexico also is a next door neighbor, a big country, an important country, south of the border. Now, what's also interesting is what he didn't mention in this speech. I note, for example, I don't think he mentioned Ukraine. And that's not an accident. We'll come back to that later on. Now, this speech has horrified many people and shocked many people, especially the Europeans, who are frankly terrified at the prospect of Donald Trump coming to power. They've done everything in their power to stop him coming to power, by the way, and they've failed. I mean, it's astonishing the lengths to which they've gone to start, this convicted felon, 1,001 court cases, very hostile press and media, and so that's okay. It's all failed. And he was elected, by the way, with a considerable majority, much more than what I personally had anticipated. Now, the question is, why should the Europeans be so worried? They should be worried, by the way. Now, for example, just take the question of Greenland. Greenland belongs legally to Denmark. Although there's an independence movement in Greenland, but I think the present president is a member of a separationist or independentist party. I might be wrong. I think that's correct. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He actually rules out he was asked specifically, he ruled out the possibility of using military force to achieve these objectives. Now, you can take that as you wish. But at the very least, however, is it not quite incongruous, to put it mildly, that here's a man that will be in charge of an important imperialist country, America, which is actually implicitly threatening military action against Denmark, which is a member of NATO? Now that's a serious question, because the Europeans are terrified, first of all, by Trump's clear determination to pull out of the Ukraine. We'll come back to the Ukraine later on, but that's lost, and he knows it's lost, and he would like to get America out of that. No, his objective, and furthermore, he's repeatedly expressed his skepticism towards NATO. Is this not? That's what they're afraid of, the Europeans. Are the Americans not planning to dump Europe, to put it bluntly? And move on to something else. Now, let's assume that might be true. It might be true, by the way. I wouldn't put it past Trump. Make America great again. America first. That's his policy.
Yes.
And the rest of the world, including Europe, last. Trump couldn't care less about Europe, as a matter of fact. Doesn't particularly like Europe, I think. And he certainly couldn't care about the Ukraine. He wants to get out. He makes no secret about it, and I believe that he will. He says publicly he's opposed to Ukraine joining NATO. Now, that's an interesting point. But of course, this says all the alarm bells are ringing in Europe. But let's assume for a moment that this is true, that he's got a plan. Why should he have such a plan? That's the point. And what does his alternative consist of? Now, there's been an interesting change in world politics. The change is taking place all the time. So many people don't notice this, but you see, for a long time, the United States, particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a long time after the Second World War, where the world was effectively divided up between two gigantic superpowers, mighty American imperialism on the one hand, and mighty Stalinist Soviet Union on the other hand. And therefore, relationships were frozen for a long time. Each of these states, powerful states, controlled spheres of influence. There was an unspoken agreement that they wouldn't interfere with each other's spheres of influence. And this uneasy balance of forces, if you like, was backed up by the fact that they both possessed powerful nuclear weapons. And there was a policy known as MAD, which you've heard of, mutually assured destruction. So therefore, they weren't going to go down the road of war and so on. Now, by the way, here's an interesting point. For a long time, take NATO, for example. For a long time, the Americans considered Europe to be fundamental to their interests, Western Europe, as a means of halting the advance of the Soviet Union. Therefore, it was fundamental to their interests. And they actually underwrote, at least theoretically, NATO gave the Europeans a written guarantee that the Americans would support them against Russia, that they'd have their back. The Europeans would be supported by the US, by an unspoken guarantee of security. Now, all of this, that consisted for a long time. It existed for a long time. Then, of course, the fundamental change was the collapse of the Soviet Union in about 1990, thereabouts. And after that, the power of Russia, Soviet Union as it then was annulled virtually.
Yeah.
The Russians could not intervene to defend their interests. And the Americans, they tore up all the agreements, even formal agreements. For example, there was a clear agreement, repeatedly stated that NATO would not advance eastwards from Germany. Even Germany, Western Germany was not supposed to join NATO, as a matter of fact.
Eastern Germany, yes.
No, Western Germany was not supposed to join. It was not supposed to join NATO. None of them were supposed to join. And they weren't supposed to advance 1 inch. Well, since then, of course, they've advanced repeatedly. And not inch by inch, but 1,000 kilometers by 1,000 kilometers in the direction of the Russian border. And the Russians were powerless at that time to do anything about it, to stop, although they saw it with growing alarm and growing concern, which they repeatedly expressed. The Americans then stepped into things like the Balkans, into Yugoslavia, which they succeeded to break up with disastrous results. Czechoslovakia, the same. All this kind of, and then finally, of course, the Middle East with the invasion of Iraq. Iraq was a former Soviet sphere of influence. They wouldn't have dared to have touched Iraq previously. They just stepped in with disastrous consequences. Now, but this process again, what you see there is a mentality which still exists in the USA. Now, that's the important point. Among a significant layer of the American ruling class, there is an idea that America can do just what it likes. America at that time, because of the Soviet Union was prostrate, China had not yet emerged as a major power. America had colossal power. There was only one superpower in the world, that was the United States. And of course, with colossal power comes colossal arrogance. They really thought that they could dominate the world, and dominate everything. That's, by the way, enshrined in a very interesting doctrine, which still exists, by the way, in their heads at least. I think it's called the rules-based international order. Have you heard of that? Everyone's heard of it, but nobody's able to define it. It's not been written down anywhere. Nobody's voted for it. The UN never voted for it. Nobody's ever, no government, the American government has never voted. But here it is, they repeatedly insist, this is what the order that must exist. The rules-based international, and the question is, what rules? Who makes up the rules? And the answer is, the Americans make up the rules according to their own convenience. So they change them every 5 minutes according to their interests. And every other country in the world is obliged to obey these rules unquestioningly. Any country that questions these rules is subject to attacks, to economic sanctions, to all kinds of aggression, to all kinds of humiliation, and ultimately to military invasion, as the case of Iraq, of Saddam Hussein, who previously, by the way, was an American puppet, incidentally, in the war against Iran. Anyway, that's a separate question. But this situation lasted, but now it's changed again. With the re-emergence of Russia, Russia has become again a powerful nation, not just militarily, but economically also it's become a powerful nation. China also has emerged. And therefore you have a situation, a map of the world now. It's a bit like geology where the tectonic plates move, Yes. And when the tectonic plates move, you get explosions taking place. And that's also goes for world politics. Now you have a different state of affairs, where there are several great powers, if you like, emerging. Some have emerged, some are in the process of emerging. Some are regional powers like Turkey and Israel and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, there are major powers like China and Russia, which have now successfully challenged the US. I think it's correct to say, according to some measures, the Chinese economy is bigger than the US economy. I don't know, some measures say that, not everything, of course. Russia, of course, is just in the process of winning the war in the Ukraine, despite all the efforts of the Americans. Here you see the limits of American power, and therefore, this is the point which we have to stress. Therefore, there's a change whereby America is no longer able to dictate. It's actually overreached itself, like the Roman Empire overreached itself. There's an interesting comparison could be made, which I won't go into that, but it's an interesting point. But they definitely overreached themselves. And now you see that clearly in the Ukraine. And Trump, that's the point, is drawing the necessary conclusions, which some of the others are reluctant to draw, very reluctant to draw. But by God, sooner or later they'll have to draw it. Life itself will impose it upon them. And surely, to come back to your opening question, and I will finish on this, one possible interpretation, it's only a theory, it's a theory which you can accept or reject, that's up to you. But I think it's very, very, very interesting. If Trump is drawing the correct conclusion, which is this: America is no longer able to maintain the position that they are the sole world power and they can dictate however they please in any part of the world. Those days are over, he's concluded. The Ukrainian business, he's very bitterly critical of Biden. He blames Biden quite correctly for dragging the US into this unnecessary conflict in Ukraine. He wants out. And if it was up to him, I'm sure he'd want the US to get out of NATO also. He doesn't like NATO, doesn't like the UN if it comes, or anything of that sort, or the World Trade Organization if it comes to that. No. He wants America to go its own. Yes, but America now must concentrate. Now get a load of this. This is the point. If his intention, and it may well be his intention, if his intention that America must, in a sense, retreat from its global role and retrench behind its natural borders of a great power, that would be what? Precisely, it'd be the American. It's a bit like the Monroe Doctrine you'd have heard of the 19th century, And in fact, the present situation that is emerging is far more similar to the situation in the 19th century up to 1914 than what it is now. It's much more similar to what it was after 1945. It's very similar, and therefore it makes sense. Not necessarily that America is going to conquer Canada, for example. Yes, but that somehow that America would increase its domination one way or another over Canada. That's on the cards. And the seizure, the taking over of Greenland, that's on the cards. I see Trump's son is there now. Now, what's he doing? Is he there to watch the Eskimos and the seals? I don't think so. It's supposed to be a private visit. If you can believe that, you can believe anything. And what he said when he was there, how nice it would be if Greenland was part of the United States. How happy everyone would be. Now, that's serious stuff. I think he means it, by the way. I think and the same thing with Mexico. The Roman domination, they already dominate Mexico, but they want to tighten that domination. They would like to establish not direct military control. I don't think that's on the cards. But something like the relationship which existed previously after 1940 of the Soviet Union in relation to Finland, where they didn't have troops based in Finland or didn't openly control the Finnish government. But in practice, Finland was basically subordinate to the interests of Russia. And something like that, to tighten their control over Canada, over these contiguous countries, that would be precisely a solid base for what? For the creation of the strengthening of real American imperialism as one more global power amidst others, because there are others, like Russia and China in particular, possibly others will come to the fore. But for the time being, let's talk about them. And they have powerful interests in other countries, which they're busy strengthening. So we see here the beginning of a restructuring on a global scale, and this will have tremendous consequences for the future. Therefore, what Trump is saying is not necessarily a load of nonsense, as some people imagine. That is, as I say, though this be madness, yet there's method in it.
Absolutely. And I think we can already see also the repercussions of this within the US, because as we've talked about many times in the podcast, many times on Marxist.com, there's a section of the ruling class that refuses to accept this state of play. And we see the Biden presidency has, if anything, been a representative of that section.
Yes.
It's in the we talk about these elections. There was a lot of talk in the run up to the 7th of January. People saying, "Oh, what is this going to be a tumultuous event or not?" And people were commenting on it. But it's interesting because this was the first election in 8 years which was not contested, because the first Trump victory was contested by the Democrats, who said that there was Russian intervention, and the second, the Biden victory, was contested by Trump, who said that there was voter fraud. This time there was no contention. Why? Because it was quite a significant victory. It was quite a convincing victory to Trump, and a decisive defeat to Biden, who is one of the least popular American presidents, as far as I can see. Nevertheless, a lot has been going on in the past few months where Biden, without any real democratic mandate, and by the way, it's not even clear if he is cognitively capable of taking any decisions, but a whole series of decisions have been taking place in the name of the Biden administration, which precisely entrenches the US, tries to dig down the US in the opposite view that Trump was elected for.
Yes.
We have the Ukraine. They've sent $5.9 billion to the Ukraine. Loads of weapons are being sold to the Ukraine, and other things. But even though people voted against those things, so what do you think that represents a conflict within the American ruling class between these two contending wings, between these two strategies?
Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, Trump is presented as a threat to democracy. And all these so-called liberals, by the way, the present establishment, both in Europe and the United States, are all liberals, and I consider them to be the worst reactionaries imaginable. Yes. The biggest counter-revolutions, the biggest enemies of democracy. Because if you analyze not what they say, not the words, but what they do, it's a complete abnegation. It's the opposite of democracy. Their idea of democracy is it's okay to win an election if you support what we want. If you don't, then it's not okay. Then that election is a fraud, and this is a dictatorship, and this must be overthrown by all kinds of all manner of means. And you see that clearly in the United States itself. I mean, for goodness sake, I mean, you can say what you like about Donald Trump, but I mean, the man resisted. He's quite resilient in that sense. I'll give him that, although he's a terrible reactionary. I hasten to add, I've got no doubts on that. Let nobody quote me any other way. But nevertheless, as a person, as a politician, he's quite resilient. And the amount of effort that they've spent to attack him, including assassination, 2 assassination attempts, which, by the way, they were quite ambivalent about. Just imagine if it had been the other way around, if there was an attempt on Harris, for example. Well, imagine that the storm of protest and indignation. No. Oh, they took a pot shot of Donald Trump. So what? They missed. Pity. That was the real attitude. It was disgusting, actually. And all the other attacks, the constant smears and so on. Yeah. And yet he won, despite the fact. Actually, my wife, Anna, took the trouble of analyzing. I think she found that the press coverage in the States and internationally, out of about, I think, 226, I think she found publications, dailies and magazines. I think the grand total of about 12 supported Trump. That's all. A massive publicity. Again, the power of the medium, they say. Power of the medium, yeah, considerable. Yes, but despite all of this and all the attacks and the legal cases and all the rest of it, you won by a colossal majority. I mean, I was quite surprised. Not just in all the swing states, that's surprising in and of itself, but also the popular vote, which I didn't think you'd get it. You did get a majority. For goodness sake, you can't argue with this. And yet they continue to sabotage. They can't. The reason why they can't question it is, how can you question these figures? If it was a narrow result, possibly they couldn't question it. It's unquestionable. However, are you quite right? No, here's a paradox. We've been, for the last couple of months, we've been in a period between the elections and the actual occupation of the formal acceptance of the president. There's a period. This period is supposed to be one in which the outgoing president offers assistance to the incoming president and makes his life easier, to have a smooth transition, which the Democrats are always arguing we're in favor of a smooth transition.
A democratic transition.
What sort of a smooth democratic transition is this? Biden has consistently spent all his time, and his team, of course, these gangsters, so-called Democrats, Jesus Christ, spent all their time in this period of a lame duck president, a president that's been rejected, for goodness sake, even rejected by his own party as incompetent and useless, and decisively rejected by a thumping majority by the American people themselves. He's been continually attempting to sabotage Donald Trump and the new administration. In particular, let's call a spade a shovel. What Biden's been doing is an absolute scandal, which nobody's prepared to comment on. He's attempted to provoke World War III. Oh, yes. In collaboration with Zelensky. Because Zelensky knows that the war is lost. And let me make one thing clear. The war in Ukraine is lost. And there's absolutely nothing that anyone can do, despite all the noise and the squeaking and the squawking of the Daily Telegraph and other idiots like that, you know. There's nothing. Demanding more arms, more money, more of the same. As if the Ukraine had not already received plenty of money and plenty of arms in the past. And all of it failed. All these so-called wonderful weapons that were going to be game changers, they all failed. The attackers' missiles now have failed again. Doesn't make any difference. They still pump this nonsense. Oh no, if only we send more money and more arms, Ukraine can still beat the Russians. Nonsense! Let me say it clearly.
I don't think anyone believes that.
Well, some people pretend that they do, but no sensible person believes it. And the fact of the matter is, you read my lips, there's absolutely nothing that anyone can do, either the Europeans or the Americans or Donald Trump or anybody else, that can prevent the Russian victory in Ukraine. It's impossible. It's finished, for goodness sake. And yet they continue. By the way, it's criminal, even from a moral point of view, never mind about a military point of view. But now they're talking about reducing there's been a big campaign. It's disgusting, actually. It's a moral scandal. A big campaign to force the Ukrainians, to force the government, which Zelensky initially didn't agree with, and now he's gone along with it under pressure, to reduce the recruitment age for the Ukrainian army to 18. Yeah. Sending young kids, and by the way, unprepared, untrained, poorly armed, to fight against this mighty Russian army, hopelessly outgunned and outmanned. In other words, cannon fodder. Sending all these young kids to be slaughtered in this slaughterhouse, because that's what it's become. That's what it is. The meat grinder, right? For what? They know they can't win the war. Of course they know that. And yet, oh no, must continue. Why must you continue? Only for one thing, and that's the prestige of politicians like Biden and Sullivan and the other gangsters and the United States. Disgusting. Disgusting. Nobody's calling this out. You know, but that's what Biden has been doing. And he's been trying to provoke the Russians by these missile strikes, which all of which have failed, by the way. The Russians have shot them all down with ease. These so-called wonder weapons, the attackers' missiles and so on. Doesn't matter. He was trying to provoke the Russians, that the Russians could make some catastrophic mistake of launching missiles against the States, which would open up an open war, which Biden said he would never agree to. And here he is encouraging it and actively proposing it. A war between the United States and Russia. In other words, the Third World War. And Zelensky wants this because he knows he's lost the war and he wants the rest of the world, the rest of Europe, NATO and so on, to come to his aid and fight the war on his behalf, if you please. Playing. Oh, yes, it's a bluff. It's a bluff. Putin has said, don't worry about Putin. The Russians are Putin is bluffing. Putin is bluffing, as somebody once said. He's bluffing until he's not bluffing. This is just insane. Imagine, I mean, and nobody's mentioning, nobody's talking about this. His latest stunt, he's put the Ukrainians up to this game, probably, is to cut off, the Ukrainians have cut off the supply of Russian gas to Europe. Now, who's going to suffer from that? I'll tell you who's suffer from it, not the Russians. The Russians will easily find alternative customers for their gas on their own. There's plenty of people that want to buy it at that price. Europe will suffer. Germany in particular will suffer. Britain will suffer. The consumers will suffer. The poor people will suffer. There'll be a colossal increase in prices, energy prices, which are already rising anyway. It will accelerate the movement towards a recession. Ukraine also will suffer, by the way, because the gas will be cut off also to them, and the money also be cut off. So what's the point of that? And all for what? For what? I'll tell you for what. In the case of gas, who gains from that? The Americans gain, because they dominate the field of liquid natural gas, which is a growing field, which is a lot more expensive than natural gas through a pipeline, which they've destroyed. The Americans blew up the Nord Stream gas. I'd be sure of it. They did that, and the investigations have been conveniently shut down. Okay.
Yes, there was an article in Sky a couple of days ago, which said that actually they've been presenting this as if America could replace all of the Russian gas in quantity, perhaps at a higher price point, but in quantity at least. But this article actually explains that in reality, the quantity of natural gas from Western sources has only gone up by 0.5%.
Yeah.
And up to 37%, which used to come from Russian gas, has just been lost, with the effect that, as you say, Europe is deindustrializing. It's not talked about so much in Britain, but this article mentions that chemicals production in Britain alone is down by more than a third in the past few years. And in Germany, industrial output has been down 20% since the invasion, and they are talking about another 20% in the next period. Yeah. So that's the impact of this war on Europe. And as you say, it will be the working class that will pay for it.
That's right. And of course, they blame it on the Russians. Oh, Putin's fault. Putin. Yeah. It's nothing to do with Putin. Putin has said the other day, he said, look, we haven't cut off the supply of gas. It's the Ukrainians have done that. All they're going to do is to press a button and then the gas will flow again freely. No problem with us. It's these guys in Kiev that have done this. And that's a fact. But nobody says this. And there's another little known fact. The Poles, there's a Russian pipe gas line going through Poland. The Poles shut down. Nobody mentions this. The Poles shut that down a couple of years ago, deliberately shut it down. And that gas line is intact. And as Putin said, all the Poles were going to do is to press a button and the gas will flow into Europe. But will they press it? No. It's astonishing how the ruling class in Europe are so mad that they completely and absolutely subordinated even their own interest to the interest of American imperialism. I mean, it is disgusting. You can't fathom it. That they've deliberately sacrificed the interests of their own people, particularly, as you say, the poor, the working class, and so on and so forth. They don't care. The Germans, for goodness sake, had a very nice relation with Russia. They had cheap Russian oil and gas, which was a major factor in the competitiveness of German industry. All suddenly stopped. Now German factories are being closed. There's a crisis at Volkswagen, another German enterprise. I don't say it's the only cause, but it's certainly a huge contributory factor. And the European working class will pay. The British working class will pay for this. They blame it on the Russians. That's a sheer lie, an absolute lie. Yes. Like all the other lies they've said about the Ukrainian business from start to finish.
Yes. So that's another mess that they're leaving for Trump. Yeah. In effect, Trump was elected on ending this war. He said it would end it within 24 hours. And it's clear that they're doing everything they can to tie down Trump to this war for as long as possible. For different reasons. One, as you say, because they have a different strategy, that America must defend every inch of its power throughout the globe, everywhere, all at once, and come down hard on anyone that brings the slightest challenge. And partially, I guess, also to make sure that any defeat becomes Trump's problem, that any mess which comes out of this becomes Trump's problem.
Yes.
Now, there's another part of the world, the Middle East, which has also been quite tumultuous in the past few years, and where it would seem that Trump and Biden have a more similar politics on the surface of it, in the sense that they both support Benjamin Netanyahu. The Trump administration, most of them are heavily staunch supporters of Israel. And nevertheless, there has been developments there as well, which would indicate, again, an attempt to tie down the Trump administration. First of all, we had the collapse of the Assad regime, which happened in early December, and which has now become clear that American imperialism knew about the offensive that the HTS forces launched on the Assad regime. Not only did they know about it, we talked about this in the podcast last week, they actually prepared mercenary forces. And I'm just going to quote one of them. He said, this Revolutionary Commando Army, which is a U.S. mercenary army in Syria, they interviewed a commander of this army and told him to be ready for an attack that could lead to the end of the Assad regime. And then he says, they did not tell us how it would happen. We were just told, everything is about to change. This is your moment. Either Assad will fall or you will fall. But they did not say when or where. They just told us to be ready. This was almost a month before the event. And these forces then participated in the onslaught on Damascus and helped usher in the collapse of Assad. Now, this is a huge step away from what has been U.S. policy since Obama, actually, which was the recognition that America made a mistake in Iraq by causing the state to collapse. That's what caused all of these jihadis and fundamentalist gangs to spring up. And therefore, seeing that we would not overthrow the Assad regime. That was something that Obama actually de facto acknowledged and focused instead on ISIS. And yet, Joe Biden and his administration have gone all in, at least not stood in the way of such a reckless thing, which is now again threatening to throw the whole region into a new quagmire. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, they now say, apparently there was a meeting, I wasn't aware of this, there was an online meeting, apparently, of a virtual meeting of ministers from the M7, the group of 7 important nations, who've decided now that in 2025, the main enemy, the main target will be Iran. So not Ukraine. I mean, they want to carry on the slaughter, and that's okay. Let the Ukrainians get slaughtered on our behalf. That's okay. Let that go on. They go down to defeat anyway. Who cares? But let's concentrate now on Iran. In other words, they finished one war, one unnecessary criminal war, which they provoked deliberately, and now they're proceeding to another war. I mean, it emerged now that apparently there were conversations, secret conversations, of members of the Biden crowd, gang, with Biden a few months ago to discuss the possibility of a strike, missile strike, I suppose, against Iran's nuclear facilities, arguing that the Ukrainians were hastening towards developing nuclear weapons, for which I believe there's absolutely no proof whatsoever. There's no proof. It's just an assertion that they make continually. I don't think there's any proof of it, although I'll say this to you. If I was the leader of Iran, given everything that I know about the United States and the conduct and so on, I'd be very, very anxious to develop nuclear weapons as quickly as possible. I mean, after all, look at North Korea. They got nuclear weapons. It's stood them in a good stead, actually, in relation to the US. But that's a separate question. Let's deal with the direct issue. As for Trump's policy, well, I don't know. Theoretically, it's the same or similar to Biden's in relation to this, in relation to the Middle East. Trump is strongly pro-Israel. Although Israel's in difficulty now as well. I've seen, in effect, if you look at this idiot, this gangster Netanyahu, has got Israel embroiled in a series of conflicts and wars, which definitely don't benefit the people of Israel, by the way. And in fact, they've failed. He brags and boasts and beats his chest as if he was an important guy, this strong man, this Netanyahu. But look at Gaza. They've reduced Gaza to a heap of steaming, smoking, bloody rubble. That's true. But have they achieved their objective? That's the question that must be asked. The objectives were, if you remember, to free the hostages. They failed. And to destroy Hamas. They failed. Hamas is still fighting, incredibly, and the reason is, of course, with all the slaughter that's taken place, there's no shortage of recruits for Hamas. There's a whole generation now of enraged, angry, embittered young people in Gaza and among the Palestinians that will never forget or forgive any of these monstrosities, this genocide which is being carried out systematically. And the world says nothing. Israel has the right to defend itself, for Jesus Christ's sake. What are you talking about? The right to defend itself by crushing the civilian population. It's a war against the civilian population. And it has failed. That's the point. It's failed. Actually, the Israelis are taking losses in Gaza every day, which they don't talk about, because they haven't succeeded in. They say Hamas has been eliminated in the northern part of Gaza, but when Israeli soldiers patrol the streets, which is supposedly cleared of Hamas people, they get shot and killed, and bombed and so on. So they failed. Same in Lebanon, by the way. They've a ceasefire now in Lebanon. To the best of my knowledge, the Israelis, in their much vaunted offensive, they didn't even succeed in capturing a single village, to the best of my knowledge. I might not be correct, but certainly they didn't succeed in their objective. And Hezbollah is still going strong. And as for the events in Syria, and now they want to get involved in Syria as well, through the Golan Heights, and more than the Golan. They want to seize territory in Syria. This brings them into conflict with Turkey.
Yes.
Which has got its own. I agree the Yanks were definitely involved. How could the CIA not know about all this? Of course they were involved. Naturally, they were involved in the whole business. They've got their objective. They've overthrown Assad. Brilliant. And what have they achieved? The guys that are now, insofar as anybody's in charge of Syria, in practice, nobody's in charge of Syria. That's the fact. But this government in Damascus is composed of what? Of guys that are pro-Hamas. Hamas welcomed the victory,
Yes.
They're friendly with Hamas. Does that benefit Israel? I don't think so. And now Netanyahu is complaining that the new situation in Syria is a threat to Israel, even to the extent he said that it might well mean war with Turkey. That's nice. So not satisfied with the 2 or 3 wars that he's already got on the boil, he wants to start another one. Well, I mean, this is all bad news for the people of Israel, I would have thought, And of course, Iran is the main threat. Iran is not the main threat, for goodness sake. The Israelis have been continuously provoking the Iranians. That's the fact of the matter, provoking them. And for the last 12 months. Constantly, I want to go into all the assassinations and the bombings and so on and so on. And the Iranians, for their side, were not stupid. They realized it's a provocation. They want to provoke a war in the Middle East into which America would be dragged. That's the same as Zelensky. Netanyahu wants to drag America into a war with Iran. But the Iranians are resistant. They don't want to give an excuse. So that's why they haven't responded as they could have responded.
Yes.
I don't know what Trump will do. Who knows? He's a difficult man to predict. But if he does, if he's foolish enough to get involved in I see he's made a statement now, a rather mysterious statement, typical Trump statement. warning Hamas that if all the hostages are not released by when, the 24th or something, some date is given, then all hell will be,
when he enters the presidency.
Yeah, all hell will be let loose. Well, I don't know what he means by that. All hell has been let loose in Gaza for some time, actually.
Well, what was interesting for me was that he added that would not be in the benefit of anyone.
Of course.
And with that, I think also he meant Israel. That's how I at least read it.
My feeling about Trump is that he's not unlike Biden, who's a stupid man and a warmonger and a representative, obviously, of that faction of the American ruling class, which believes that America can still dominate the entire world and do whatever they like. They cannot, by the way, as events have shown. But in any case, Trump is different. Now, look, Trump is a reaction. You don't need to. I hope people don't ring in after this program and say, "Look, Alan Woods is defending Trump," which is nonsense. Of course, I don't. Trump is a reaction. Of course, he is. However, he does have a different policy and a different view of things to Biden. There's a division in that sense, and I think his preference. I'm sure his preference in relation to it. He said so. Is not war. He doesn't like wars very much, I think, but economic pressure on Iran, which doesn't satisfy Biden and that crowd. It's not enough. They demand blood. They demand that. They want war. They always want war as a solution to all America's problems. All that does is to debilitate America still further. In any case, I don't think Trump is out for a war. As for all hell being let loose, well, all hell has been let loose. What can the Americans do, by the way? I mean, they got an aircraft carrier somewhere floating around. Send another one. They did that before. The problem is now that Israel's enemies, not just Hamas and Hezbollah, but also the Houthis, are now acquiring. I've noticed every time they strike with missiles, they got missiles with a greater reach, more modern, more sophisticated, and so on. I believe probably they're getting these from Iran, of course, but from Russia. That's the way the Russians are getting back on Biden for agreeing to launch missile strikes deep within Russian territory. So he's doing the same with his proxies in the Middle East. Why not? Why not, indeed? And by the way, surely these aircraft carriers are a sitting duck. Sooner or later, one of these is going to be sunk. Imagine the effect of that on American prestige. And by the way, I'll just say this. I don't know exactly what Donald Trump is going to do, but if he's foolish enough to get involved in a war with Iran, well, Iran is not going to be the pushover that some people seem to think. I mean, the idea that Iran is weak and they can't resist. They said the same thing about Russia and Ukraine, by the way. That was shown to be false. Iran may be not as strong as the United States, but they're not a pushover by any manner of means. They've got a big army of hardened fighters with battle experience. In any war, by the way, the entire population will rally to the regime. Unfortunately, the idea that somehow that was going to bring the regime down is false. If many of the Iranian people are very unhappy with the rule of the mullahs, it's true. They don't like the present regime. They've shown that. However, the hatred of the Ayatollahs is nothing compared to the hatred of American imperialism and Israel. And they will unite. Yes, there'll be no question then of overthrowing the regime for some time anyway. And they will fight. They'll put up a ferocious resistance. And frankly, the American imperialists will burn their fingers, and the Israelis will burn their fingers very badly if they take on Iran, which, by the way, also will have the backing of Russia. I don't know if it's escaped people's attention. I think it's on the 17th of this month, which is only a couple of days, about a week away. The Russians and the Iranians are going to sign some kind of an agreement, a military treaty of mutual assistance. Now, that surely is a game changer. If the Russians pile in and the Chinese pile in and provide the Iranians with sophisticated missiles which they don't yet possess and increase their air defenses and so on, well, it surely must make people think. Trouble is, people don't think, do they? I don't think any of these guys are thinking. They really are the limit, you know. I mean, the old Greeks had a proverb, you know, those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make them mad. These guys are crazy. But anyway, that's the future. Unfortunately, the future facing the Middle East is not a very nice one.
Yes, we've talked in the past few years. We've commented a lot. You have commented a lot on the crisis faced by U.S. imperialism. That it's reached its limit in certain areas, and it can't intervene as it wishes before, as it wishes as it did before. In that context, you have also the rise of Russia, which is now recovered from the collapse after the fall of the Soviet Union. It's become a military force which has been honed. If anything, the Ukraine war has accelerated the military development of Russia into a world power. It has now a huge army of almost 1 million people with battle experience and so on and so forth, an advanced military industrial complex. Then you have China, which economically and militarily is catching up, as you said. And you have the dominant wing of US imperialism refusing to accept this, and at every step choosing this idea that we cannot be seen to take any steps back. Now you have Donald Trump coming in and saying, no, we need to change this. And this is leading him to a conflict with the whole establishment, not just in the US, but also the NATO establishment, which is, you can say maybe it's an extension of US imperialism. All of the establishments in places like Denmark and Germany, Britain, they in many ways were subservient to US imperialism. And they're all clashing together. We've seen recently that Elon Musk, ally of Donald Trump, supporting these anti-establishment, how can we say, right-wing parties that coming up in Europe. At one point, he supported reform, although now he says that Farage must go, and then supported Giorgia Meloni in Italy. Then he supported the AfD in Germany. I'm not sure if he supported Le Pen, but it would fit if he also supported Le Pen in France. Do you think what we're seeing is a struggle between these two wings throughout the West?
Well, that's an interesting question. First of all, it's in two parts, basically. As far as America's interest in Europe is concerned, well, after the Second World War, Europe was important as they'd say, as a bulwark against communism, against the Soviet Union and so on. But nowadays, you see, Trotsky made a very interesting prediction, a brilliant prediction. I think it was made in 1923 or thereabouts. And he predicted that the future of world history, the center of gravity of world history, had passed from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. Don't forget, the Romans, Mediterranean means the middle of the world. The Mediterranean used to be the Roman lake. It used to be for a long time, it was the center of European great power politics, the Mediterranean. It passed already in Trotsky's day, it passed from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, and he made a further prediction. It was going to pass from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Now, I think that's already happened. And then the importance of Europe now for American business is far less. Something the Europeans have not yet woken up to, you know. But then our secondary, America's, Trump in particular, his main interest is China. And his main obsession with China. China is a growing force, a powerful force. I've heard some people say, well, China is a weak, dependent nation. That's wrong. Whoever thinks that puts their head right. It's stupid. Of course it isn't. China is a major power, economic power and military power. And it exerts a powerful influence. It has its own sphere of influence now in Asia, which is, of course, we're talking here about an area with a huge population, far bigger than the rest of the world, which is growing, and very fast-growing economies in places like India, Vietnam, Indonesia. By the way, I see Indonesia now has joined the BRICS. which again is a threat to American influence and so on. So the Americans are concentrating. They should concentrate on Asia. They should concentrate on China, and therefore Europe is no longer a secondary question. Therefore, NATO, frankly, I think, as far as Trump is concerned, has outlived its usefulness, and that, of course, creates panic in the European ruling class. Because how can they get along without the American protection? But
they all mobilized against him in the elections.
Of course they did, but they failed. Yes. But he doesn't forget these things, by the way. That's why he's backing other things like Maloney and the ADF in Germany as well. He doesn't like these people. He made no secret. I think he hates Starmer, by the way, and Musk had made that quite plain. But in any case, that's beside the point. The Europeans are trapped now. They don't like it. Some of them, particularly the stupid idiots in London, the Brits are the most stupidest of the lot. Christ almighty, you know. They still think that Britain is a major power in the world, good heavens, instead of an unimportant little island off the coast of Europe. The Yanks even are not even interested in Britain if it comes to that, or Europe. And quite easily they could walk away from Europe. In fact, they will. At a certain stage, they will. And then Europe will have to reconsider its attitude towards Russia and things like that.
Yes.
So, I mean, yes, there are divisions in the ruling class. The ruling class in Europe has shown complete stupidity, complete bankruptcy, the complete inability to think anything through. I mean, it's astonishing how ignorant and stupid these people are. But they'll have to come to terms with the fact that the Americans will turn their backs on them. Because the future of the world is not in Europe it's certainly not in Britain. That's a stupid idea. The future of the world is in Asia. It's not accidental that the Russians are closely collaborating with China. And you see, the whole center of gravity now of world politics is changing. That's the point. And America will act accordingly.
Yeah.
You know, and that means it's got serious consequences for Europe. But Europe is no longer, put it this way, it's no longer the center of attention as it once was. Yes. And the sooner that the Europeans wake up to that fact, the better.
Yes. As the last question, I think it's been an excellent discussion we've had. There is this idea that this direction that Trump is going towards, i.e. a situation where there's a multipolar world, so to say. You still have American imperialism, by far the most powerful imperialist power, militarily, economically, still stronger, way ahead of the others. But nevertheless, coexisting with a series of other smaller global powers, essentially weaker global powers such as Russia, China, maybe India to a certain extent. Now, some people say that will create a more peaceful, a more just, a more tranquil and stable world. That's what we should aspire towards. That essentially Russia and China will help us calm things down because they're more level-headed, and then the greater powers can rule democratically amongst themselves and decide for the way forward for the world. Do you think that's a correct statement?
Oh, by the way, before I take, that's a good point. Before I answer that, this business of the Europeans are afraid. The US imperialism provided a security guarantee in NATO.
Yes.
Which was nuclear, actually, a nuclear guarantee against what? Against Russia. Now, frankly, that was always a lie.
Yeah.
It was always a bluff. They were not. You think for a minute that the United States was going to sacrifice themselves to save the poor, unfortunate Europeans from the terrible Russians? That was never going to happen. But the reason that they made that lie, that false promise, that bluff, it was a bluff. It always was a bluff. They never thought that bluff would be called. In the past, because of this balance of terror and so on, there was no reason to think. Now it has been called by the Russians in the Ukraine. That's what it boils down to. By taking the action that he has done in the Ukraine, Putin is called the bluff of the Americans. And you can see that it's a bluff because they've lost. They've lost. I'll leave that to one side. It is a bluff, and now it'll be shown to be a bluff, which is a good reason why they could withdraw quite easily and say, well, look, it's up to you guys. That's what Trump will say. You want to carry on and fight in the UK? Carry on. You pay for it. We are out of here. That makes sense. Now, on the other question that you raised, well, this multipolar, I don't particularly like the expression multipolar world. I don't like it. It's one of these catchphrases. But it is true. First of all, let's be clear about one thing. American imperialism has declined relative to Russia and China and so on. That's true. However, it still remains the most powerful economic and military force on earth. Let's not forget that fact. And it will still use this power to hold on to its interests as much as it sees necessary. By the same rule, the up and coming powers like China and Russia, they will increasingly assert their interests in their own spheres of influence. See, in other words, what this is the main point. We're going back now. I think I said this earlier, and I'll repeat the point. We're going back now to a situation far more similar, say, to the 19th century, or to the period when Lenin wrote his marvelous book, Imperialism. I would strongly advise communists, people watching this program, to reread Lenin's Imperialism if you want to know what's happening in the world today. It really fits like a glove. And this is the kind of world we're in. Now, will that lead? Then, of course, don't forget, at that time there was a multipolar world. There wasn't two powers. There were many powers at that time. Germany, Japan, Britain, of course, France, even Holland and Belgium were imperialist powers and so on. At that time. Now, was that a recipe for a peaceful world? I don't think so. 1914 is the answer to that question. Not peaceful at all. On the contrary, this division of the world into and the struggle for markets, it still will consist of an almighty struggle for markets, spheres of influence, possessions of raw materials, and so on. That will go on. Whether or not that would lead to armed conflict, in some cases it will. I don't think it will lead to an all-out conflict. I still don't believe that, because that would be a senseless thing, which would lead to the destruction of everything and everybody. So that they wouldn't they wouldn't want that. What you will have constantly is what you got now: hostility, antagonism, national antagonisms. The main thing from an economic point of view, globalization is finished. Instead of globalization now, which did benefit them for a long period of time, of course, one of the reasons for stability and the growth of the capitalist system during a period, now you've got, instead of that, the growth of economic nationalism. That's the point. And the struggle for markets and spheres of influence, that will continue. It will be mainly a struggle. Trade wars, that's what Trump is on about, with tariffs and so on and so on. Trade wars will be the norm. But that will have a tremendous negative effect on the world, on the capitalist system. It's a recipe for economic crises, poverty, unemployment, and so on. And therefore, that's a recipe for the class struggle. And even the wars that take place, of course, wars are terrible things, we know. But ultimately, history tells us, and 1914 tells us, 1917 tells us, ultimately wars do produce revolutions, you know. All kinds of social turbulence and convulsions will take place. A constant questioning of the existing setting will take place. And that, of course, opens the door for us. It opens the door for revolution. It opens the door for new thinking, new ideas, for alternatives, serious alternatives. Because that's the point, isn't it? Nowhere in the world has any serious alternative been put towards the people. That's the reason for the rise of people like Trump and similar demagogues, right-wing demagogues. It's because of the abject failure of the left. That must be stated quite clearly. The so-called left. What left, I say? Nothing. It's pathetic. They've all failed. And therefore, the door is open, and the support for communist ideas,
yes,
for our ideas, is already growing fast among a layer of the youth. I don't wish to exaggerate. There's still a minority of a minority. That's right. But it is growing. It is significant. And on the basis of the terrific events, the titanic events which impend, which are inevitable, as a result of these convulsions, these tectonic shifts, as a result of this, our tendency, the tendency of Marxism, of communism, of genuine communism, will grow inevitably on the basis of patient work on our part, patient and systematic work on our part. That's most important. The development of cadres and educating people in ideas such as we're doing in programs like this. But above all, on the basis of events. Lenin once said, life teaches. Simple as that. Life teaches. The masses, they don't learn from books, not because they're stupid. They haven't got time to read books. That's all. But they learn from the biggest book of all, which is the book of events, of life, of experience. And experience, it will be a hard experience, a very hard, a very harsh, a very bitter, a very tragic experience, but one which will produce at a certain stage the consequences of a tremendous movement against this horrible regime, this horrible setup, and a struggle for a new society, which is, of course, socialism and communism.
Thank you very much, Alan. That was a great end to a great discussion. For all of you out there, if you agree with these ideas and the fight for communism that Alan just mentioned, you can go on our website, marxist.com/join, and join the Revolutionary Communist International that organizes groups, sections throughout the world. We have work in 70 countries and more, probably. And we want you to join us. We need you to join the Revolutionary Communist movement to build the forces necessary to bring this system down that is dragging humanity down into this state of affairs. And for all of the listeners out there, we'll be back again next week, the Against the Stream, as usual, 3 p.m. Thursday, 3 p.m. London time, where we will discuss world events from a communist perspective. Thank you very much, everyone.